Hello, good evening. Welcome, one and all. Tonight we're getting back into The Mythical Origin of the Egyptian Temple by E.A.E. Reymond. And tonight we're getting into chapter 3, which is entitled Myth About the Origin of the Temples of the Sun God. The third, fourth, and fifth Edfu cosmogonical records preserve a part of the myth described as the coming of Re to his mansion of Misnet. The myth concerns another period of the mythical age when the lands of the sacred domains were already in existence, and when the primeval houses of God were founded in places other than the original domains of the falcon. It acquaints us with an entirely different order of ideas and a different conception of the origin of sacred domains from what is known from the first myth. And this is the second record. Hinterland of the Waret, which is Hinterland, of the W-A, and then there's this little backwards thing. Waret. The first scene recorded is placed in the hinterland of the Waret, in which several sacred places, or paylands, were created. These are listed as 1. Island of Fury, 2. Mansion of Shooting, 3. Harma, Har-MAA, 4. Nebwet, 5. Mansion of Mystery, 6. House of Combat, 7. Tanin Hotep, 8. Seat of the Two Gods. A company of gods, including the falcon, Thoth, the maker of substances, and the divine of heart, is said to have wandered through the hinterland. They arrived in a BW place, in which they seem to have created their dwelling place. No description of the place in the hinterland survives in the Edfu text. We do not know whether this place means one of the sacred domains listed in the beginning of the narrative, or whether it describes another place in that region. Moreover, no allusion is made to the life of this BW- place and to the resting place of the gods, which might eventually have been erected there. The text tells us only that after the gods settled down, the enemy snake appeared. Third record, creation of the magic protection. When the enemy, the snake, appeared at the landing stage of that domain, place for crushing, was planned and protective guards of the god were formed. When the enemy, the snake, appeared at the landing stage of that domain, place for crushing, was planned, and protective guards of the god were formed. The ancestor settled down there. Thoth and Seshit were present and sanctified, the members of the company of the god's guard. An interpretation of a later date tells us that this protecting company were regarded as the soldiers of Tanin, whom Tanin called up and sent in the place for crushing, because this domain was created at the command of the Earthmaker. Let's see. Hey, Gondora official, welcome in. Welcome, everybody. Let's look up how to say that word. Make sure I'm not, I'm probably butchering tons of this, but Seshat. Let's find out. Goddess. Pronunciation. Boom. Hey, I thought that it was on that. Let's try again. There we go. Seshat. Okay. I love that guy. Okay, great. Seshat. I bet this is too hot to get into, but it sure is tasty. All right, so Seshat. Okay. The command of the Earthmaker. This company consisted of 60 divine beings divided into 4 groups. Each group was of a different nature and had its own chief. The chief of the first group was a hawk called Lord of the Spear. He was followed by 14 hawks. The chief of the second group was a lion. He was called Lord of the Knife and had 14 lions in his train. The chief of the third group was a snake named Greatly Feared and had 14 snakes at his companions as his companions. The chief of the fourth group was a bull whose name was Great Roarer, Roarer, and whose group contained 14 bulls. 14. 5. The whole company, having been sanctified by Thoth and Seshat, became the protective powers in the Bwatiti, which is BW-TITI. Each group took up a position on one of the sides of the place. The place for crushing resembled a divine shelter within that domain. Or it actually says resembled a word that I don't know, IFDW, of the divine shelter, NHT, within that domain. So the place for crushing resembled a blank of the divine shelter within that domain. The hawk is said to have taken his position on the south side, the lion on the north side, and the east was the snake, and the bull stood on the west. All of them had their fellows in their train. When the enemy snake arrived at the landing stage of the Waret, the arm was worshipped. An arm is italicized. Then the ritual book of protection of Tannin was given to Horus, and a decree against him, who is rebellious against his lord, was proclaimed by the falcon, who bears here the title of the preeminent in the mansion of victory. Wow, these are some crazy cool titles. Fight against the snake. Third section. The fight against the snake was led by the falcon. The text of this part of the record is very obscure and much damaged. However, it seems that there is an allusion to a fight on the earth in front of the shelter. Again, every single time I read an allusion, it's ALL. ALLUSION. Another fight took place at the same time in the sky, in which the falcon was believed to fight against the snake named Spitty. SBTY, SBD. In both, the falcon, while fighting, was protected. In both, the falcon, while fighting, was protected by the 4 groups of protectors. The snake was overthrown, and the fighting company settled down beside the snake. The battlefield was purified for Re, and he became the lord of that place. This narrative indicates that the site selected by the gods for the foundation of the mansion was the former battlefield. It appears in this myth to be equivalent to the spot given in bequest by the Ka to the falcon, Ka. Hey, Bootsy, good to see ya. Awesome, welcome in. Fourth section. Settling down in the Bwatiti. The battlefield was purified, and Re, with his company, the falcon, Tannin, and the creator gods of the temple, settled down in the Bwatiti, the place for crushing, together with the ancestors, or together with the ancestor singular. Then the ceremony of laying out the foundation of the outer enclosure of Re was made in the presence of the eldest of Wetjeset Netter, Tannin, the Ogdoad, Re, and the Shebtu. The builder gods erected the walls of the Ifdu. The text seems to indicate that before the temple itself was built, the enclosure was constructed from reeds, and this enclosure was 300 by 400 cubits. Wow, that's pretty big. The interior of it was planned by Thoth and Seshat. The first unit constructed in this enclosure was a sanctuary described as 7, which is like SH and then a 7, like almost like a 7 to the power, which measured 90 by 20 cubits. Okay, wait, so the first unit constructed in this enclosure was a sanctuary described as SH7, which measured 90 by 20 cubits and was divided into 3 rooms. It is strange that in the description of the interior of the enclosure, the word HWT-NTR was not used. Subsequently, a new ceremony of foundation, the stretching of the cord, was performed. A large court was planned in front of the sanctuary. The builder gods are said to have erected the ifdu, four sides of the enclosure. So wait, is ifdu the place for crushing? No, that's Watiti. The builder gods are said to have erected the ifdu, four sides of the enclosure. It seems that this building was 90 by 90 cubits, and that probably another wall was constructed around this courtyard at a distance of 10 cubits on both west and east. Thoth designed two sanctuaries, again measuring 90 by 20 cubits, which stood along the west and east side. 11. Man, we're doing. Right? I There's so many wild words in this book. Punching hell. Yeah, totally cool. We suspect that the description preserves the picture of a very early sacred enclosure, which the tradition regarded as being the place of worship in which the sun god was adored first. Nowhere in their definitive evidence, nowhere, nowhere is there definitive evidence that this was the first solar temple, and nowhere is there any allusion to the seat of the first occasion of the sun god, such as the lotus or the mound, which would eventually be contained within the enclosure. Fifth section. Description of the presumed first solar temple. The first structure, which was made within the outer enclosure, was a chapel measuring 90 by 20 cubits. It consisted of 3 rooms. At its front, there was erected a large forecourt of 90 by 90 cubits, which was surrounded by an outer wall extending 10 cubits to the west and to the east. 2 sanctuaries were erected along the east and the west side, both measuring 20 by 90 cubits. Then a hypostyle hall of 50 by 30 cubits was constructed at the front of the central room of the first unit. Then another hall of 20 by 30 cubits and 2 consecutive halls, each 45 by 20 cubits. 45, which is 9 to the 20 to the 11. Interesting. For fives. By 20 cubits were added at the front of the first hypostyle hall. Hypostyle, Hypo style. Let's check it out. Oh, calm down. Let's be gentle with you. Hypostyle. It's an old book. Hypostyle hall. What is a hypostyle hall? Hypostyle is an ancient Greek term denoting a building having rows of columns supporting its roof. Cool. As befitting a divine mansion, Egyptian temples were imposing structures often built of stone on a large scale. Cool. These are at Karnak. Let's open this in a bigger and share. Open image, a new tab. Okay, back here. Let's share this. Mary, good to see you. I hope you're having a great week. Awesome to see you. All right, let's present. Share screen. Which one? This one, I think. Yes, okay. That's hypostyle. Looking on up. Look at that. That's Karnak. Whoa. Man, can you imagine being in these places when they were newer? Cool. Hey, Pearl, good to see you. Welcome in. So that's a hypostyle. Was added at the front of the first hypostyle hall. Our source seems to discern in the organization of this enclosure a first sanctuary of 4 rooms, which presumably comprised 3 rooms and a hypostyle hall in front of them. It therefore follows that in the development of the temple sketched above, there must have been 3 gates, or rather, there must have been 3 stages. A, the creation of the first sanctuary. B, the creation of the large forecourt at the front of it with 2 side sanctuaries. And C, the addition of the other cultus rooms and halls on the axis of the central room of the first sanctuary. The overall dimensions of this temple were then 90 by 110 cubits. Hey, Paradox Fossils, welcome to see ya. Or welcome and good to see ya. After the completion of this initial temple, a second was built at the front of this complex, but contiguous to it. Is that how you say that? Contiguous? Contiguous. Let's see here. Back. Contiguous. Starting a common border, or wait, sharing a common border, touching. Contiguous. All right, yeah. Sharing a common border. Sweet. So after the completion of this initial temple, a second was built at the front of this complex, but contiguous to it. There seems to have been constructed at first a hypostyle hall of 30 by 50 cubits at the front of the former complex. Then again, a large forecourt was erected measuring 90 by 110 cubits. In this court, there seems to have been a row of smaller sanctuaries along the west and east side. Finally, an outer wall was made extending 15 cubits to the west and to the east of the walls of the forecourt. These 2 temples, now described by the term HWT-NTR, were surrounded by a wall which formed an enclosure of 110 cubits from east to west and 240 cubits from south to north, and simultaneously created an ambulance, to ambulatory. I should know that. Let's find out. Ambulatory church. A church. Ambulatory. Oh, let's put my fingers on the right keys. Ambulatory definition architecture. What is an ambulatory in architecture? Oh, sweet. Oh my gosh, these are so cool. In architecture, continuation of the aisled spaces on either side of the nave or the central part of the church, around the apse, which is a semicircular projection at the east end of the church, or chancel, to form a continuous processional way. Wow. Okay, so let's look at this too. Images. Wow. Let's see. Let's find a juicy picture. Okay, so wait. Ambulatory, and then let's say Egypt. What you got? No, it's not showing me an ambulatory. Okay, so let's take that word Egypt out. Medieval art and architecture. It's not as such a juicy picture, but let's see here. Bum, 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 bum. So it's like this rounded area. It's so cool. Buffalo architecture and history ambulatory. Okay, this is a really cool picture. Open a new tab. Oh, it's so tiny. Let's find a different one, but it's a really cool picture. Ooh, look at these. Man, architecture is something else. Open in new tab. That's better. Let's share this one. So this is like an ambulatory in a church. Okay, StreamYard, stop screen, remove. Present, stop screen. Now, present, share screen. Ambulatory, ancient architecture. Boom! Look at that! Isn't that cool? Oh, let's go in for some water. That's still too hot. And simultaneously created an ambulatory. I'm reading that whole. I'm reading that. I'm starting from the top on that one. These two temples, now described by the term HWT-NTR, were surrounded by a wall which formed an enclosure of 110 cubits from east to west and 240 cubits from south to north, and simultaneously created an ambulatory. Since the record also speaks of an original and large enclosure of 400 by 300 cubits, it is evident that the sacred area of the sun god was conceived as consisting of two enclosures, one within the other, one of 400 by 300 cubits and the other of 110 by 240 cubits. Within the smaller inner enclosure, there were constructed the two temples. The following section of the record shows that the description given above is that of a temple in which the sun god and Tannin were worshipped jointly. Dude. Hey, Sass, good to see you, man. Welcome in. Fifth record and the sixth section. Consecration of the temple of the sun god. When the construction of the sacred enclosure was completed, Rey and Tannin were told of it by Thoth and Seshat. They arrived with their company of gods. These were the protecting deities, then the sages, the builder gods, the Ogdoad, and the Shebtu. They came near the enclosure, and Rey gave a name to it, Speedy of Construction. Afterwards, they proceeded to the temple, which was constructed in the place where the snake was pierced. Another ceremony of bestowing names upon the temple was performed by Tannin, and the name of this joint temple was the House of Appearance of the Mansion of the Throne. The same narrative hints also at a complexion between the creation of the temple and a divine being called the Ka of the Earth, which is the Ka of the Earth. This description discloses the essential features of the history of the solar temple. It seems that, after the temple was given names by Tannin, there was completed an act resembling the episode of adoration of the temple as an entity. Re Harakte, Harakte maybe, is described as adoring the temple, the great seat, and uttering the spell, O thou place in which Aposis was pierced. Apopsis. Apopis. AP. I'm thinking of cells, when cells die, but that's not what it says. Apoptosis. No, Apopis. Capital Apopis. Okay. O thou place in which Apopis was pierced. As the Ka of the earth lives for me, I have constructed thee as my house of appearance in the mansion of the god. I have hidden myself in thee, and I have made thee as my great seat in the first sanctuary. That was his spell. Awesome, Pearl. That's so cool. Seventh section, E. Festival of Entering the Temple. Unlike the myth about the origin of the Temple of the Falcon, this narrative gives a description of the ceremony which started the life of the temple. It pictures the arrival of the gods in the newly created temple. The Edfu inscriptions preserve a scene representing a procession of gods, which might trace the way of approach to the festival of entering the temple, as it might have been performed in the early temples. Allusion is made to an episode in which the Earthmaker was conducted into the presence of Re. When the god reached the sanctuary, Ta Tannen was believed to utter, "O Re, enter thy sanctuary. I enter in thy train." The Ogdoad recited spells of adoration and hymns, the ritual of the festival of entering the house of the god. A procession performed by all the deities who were engaged in the creation of the temple, such as the Shebtu, the seven sages with Toth, and the seven builder gods with Seshat, ended this festival. Whoa. Man, this is juicy because, symbolism. Eighth section. The second solar temple, the mansion of Misnit. The text then proceeds to describe yet another temple of Re. In many respects, this second solar temple is almost identical with the third unit of the first solar temple. Its overall dimensions, for instance, are the same, 110 by 90 cubits. It differs, however, in the arrangements of its front part, where there was a hill of 15 by 45 cubits and a second hall called the Schippenmer. It's SBHT-M weird apostrophe RT, called the something, of 45 by 50 cubits. This temple was given the name Great Seat. Okay, so it was called the Great Seat. Oh, no, that's different. Those are different letters. It differs, however, in the arrangements of its first part, where the hall, where there was a hall of 15 by 45 cubits and a second hall called Blum. Okay, so this is the hall in the Great Seat, which was 45 by 50 cubits. Okay, so this temple was given the name Great Seat by Thoth. Tannen, on the other hand, conferred the name Mansion of Misnit on its chief sanctuary, but the name part of the temple is also referred to as the seat of the two gods. This temple housed Re and his ancestor, DNF, who is said to be Tannen, and their company of gods. The record discloses the belief that Re himself invited the deities to settle in this mansion, saying, "May the gods settle therein," so said Re, and the gods settled in the domain of the gods. Dude. This account also refers to the festival of entering the temple, which in the main is identical with that already described. There is one important difference in that the second festival of entering the temple is described as including a procession around the temple performed by all the gods before they entered and assumed their rightful places in it. It is evident that apart from the lord of the temple, the sun god, and the ancestor god, the solar temple was regarded as a real home of all the gods who took part in the origin of the temple and sacred lands. Additional records. Origin of the Temple of Mesen, Mesen. At the end of the fourth record, there is an additional text which refers to the foundation of the Temple of Mesen. Here, it may be suggested, is a reference to a mythical temple other than the temples already described. This temple, we are told, was founded in the place where the falcon dwelt. The falcon, in his primeval seat, the Great Seat, was assailed by his enemies, but Re, his ancestor Tannen, and the Ogdoad came to protect him. After his enemies had been overthrown, these 10 gods ordered the mansion of the gods to be built. Saturnian McSlappin, welcome everybody. Welcome in. So the actual work of building was accomplished by the builder gods and the magical protection of that site was made by the sages. Oh, wait, I skipped a sentence. I was actually just trying to reread that last sentence. Let's see here. After his enemies had been overthrown, these 10 gods ordered the mansion of the god to be built. Re thus summoned Thoth and Seshat, who laid out the foundation. The actual work of building was accomplished by the builder gods, and the magical protection of that site was made by the sages. 2. So that was 1. This is 2. Foundation of the great seat of Re from the primeval time. The builder gods, they sped to the great seat of Re from the primeval time, his eye expectant at their coming. They constructed the meson in a blessed operation and by the work of their skillful fingers on the great foundation ground which Sefik Abwi planned and which Isden drew up by his own fingers according to the command of Re and Tannin. The early primeval deities, being assembled in their train, praised the sun god who created the Ka on the first occasion to the limits of eternity, which is capitalized, on the first occasion to the limits of eternity. 3. Arriving in the great seat, in the presence of their father Tannin and his grandson Horus, the son of their brethren who ordered their majesties to construct the mansion of the god in order to alight therein, they placed the cubit of Tek upon their arms, Seshat and sages being together with them all. Stretching the cord by Seshat, Reksu was sanctified, which is REKH-SW, was sanctified. These builder gods established the 4 sides of their enclosure, namely the enclosure of 300 cubits by 400 cubits. Speedy of construction, men call it by name. The sanctuary is within it, great seat by name, and all its chapels are according to the norm. Dude, this is juicy. Man, yeah, this book is old. Okay. All right, I'm going to take this awesome ambulatory down. And now we're at chapter 4. And let's, before we get into chapter 4, I'm going to drink some hot tea. Where are you, spoon? Okay, yeah, because I haven't even squashed this little coconut bomb yet. Oh, yeah, all that fresh coconut milk. It's my new favorite thing in tea, dude. It's so good. I recommend anyone do it. I'm thinking I'm going to make a bunch of them up. So far, I've just been making like 2 at a time. Oh my gosh. All that fresh coconut milk and the fat. Oh my goodness. It's the perfect temp now. Dude, bomb. All right. Chapter 4. Interesting, Saturnian. Interesting. Okie dokie. So, chapter 4. Brief survey of the Egyptian sources bearing on the origin of the temple. The attempt to interrupt the Edfu cosmogonical texts is beset with great difficulties, and in spite of all efforts, it is quite evident that much more will have to be done before we can claim to understand the whole narrative and its allusions. Nevertheless, the events sketched in the 2 preceding chapters reproduce, in all probability, the essential features of the Edfu cosmogonical records. It seems not unreasonable to claim that these texts confront us with facts and situations that are entirely new. Certain allusions to the origin of the Egyptian temple and to the fact that the Egyptians placed the Egyptians placed it in primeval times are already known. The Egyptian temple is frequently equated with the god's seat of the first occasion. This seat of the first occasion was conceived as a place in which the god revealed himself for the first time, and was generally pictured as a mound, sometimes named it's like K backwards 3Y, and sometimes H backwards, comma, Y, the Chi or the high, was generally pictured as a mound, sometimes named Chi, sometimes high. It would consequently seem that the Egyptians believed that the mound of the primeval age was the original place of the temple. The records here studied seem to show a very different theory. Equally familiar is the oft-quoted evidence from the texts of the temple of Philae, isn't it Philae? In which the temple is described as an entity that existed before everything else. But nowhere are there texts that, in their length and richness, can compare with the Edfu records, which hitherto have been unknown and have not consequently been utilized in previous studies. Por qué? I guess maybe because they weren't known. The essential significance of the Edfu records is that a historical fact, such as the foundation of a temple and its building, is projected into a mythological plane. We do not think that this idea was derived from the doctrine of the Edfu priests. The cosmogonical records would hardly be extracts from sacred books which were special to the temple of Horus at Edfu, or were exclusively writings of the Upper Egyptian priests according to local traditions. Doubtless, the title of the sacred book, which forms the center of this study, gave a fairly clear idea of the general significance of the Edfu records, and their contents seem to be of such importance as to support our hypothesis. It is most probable that these records, in their full version, formed part, and only part, of a much wider and more general theory concerning the origin of sacred domains and their temples. The part of the general theory that survives on the walls of the temple at Edfu makes us familiar with the history of the temples of two gods, the falcon and the sun god. Our exposition showed that the Edfu version of the sacred book consists of a series of short accounts concerned, on the one hand, with the history of two temples of the falcon described as the temple in Wecheset Neder and the temple in Jeba, and on the other hand, with the history of two temples of the sun god, which are the temple in the place for piercing and the mansion of Misnet. No shred of archaeological evidence for the evidence of such temples has come down to us. At Edfu, these temples are pictured as the houses of gods in the primeval age. The descriptions are detailed, and their richness permits us to sketch out a coherent picture of the primeval world of gods, which the Egyptians believed to have existed before the physical world of men, and from which the temples were derived. The Edfu records give us all the phases of the growth of these temples. They describe the way in which the land on which the temples were founded was believed to have been created. They explain the subsequent stages in the formation of the sacred places. They give an account of the various stages in the development of these temples from the primitive state of a humble place of worship, to the developed mansion of the god. Each of the subsequent phases in the development of these primeval temples is accompanied with descriptions of mythical events which, from the Egyptian point of view, might have been decisive moments in the course of the primeval age, and which were believed to determine the growth of the temple. This is so juicy. The Carduchius. Excuse me. Yeah, I don't know how it's spelled, but I understood what you meant. Oh, the serpent. Okay, wait. Yeah. The Caduceus. Yum. These temples, though they are described as the work of the gods themselves, appear to be conceived as actual physical entities. The descriptions are so precise and detailed that it is reasonable to suggest that they embody an attempt to describe the history of the growth of such early temples, which are now lost. These records can well be taken not only as a source book of the history of the Egyptian temple, but also as that of the mythological situation which surrounded the origin and proceeded step by step with the growth of the temple. Proceeded. Let's try that again. It's a big sentence, but I'm going to do it again. These records can well be taken not only as a source book of the history of the Egyptian temple, but also as that of the mythological situation which surrounded the origin and proceeded step by step with the growth of the temple. It would therefore be of interest to attempt to reconstruct the history of their development, for very little is known about the early sacred places in Egypt in general, and no record is preserved to tell us of the original cultist places of the falcon and those of the sun god. The accounts of the development of the domains and temples of the falcon and those of the sun god present several points of similarity, since both the temples appear to be the result of a long period of development, and the place of worship at the beginning of the world does not seem to be of the same type as the temples at the dawn of historical times. On the other hand, however, individual events are not always described in the same way. The ideas that lay behind the story of the origin of the temple of the falcon appear to have been an entirely different order from the tradition concerning the creation of the temples of the sun god. The biggest difference is that the myth about the origin of the temple of the falcon gives an explicit picture of the primeval world in which the temple originated. It seems to emphasize the events which are believed to lead to the foundation of the first temple at the beginning of the world. The second myth, on the contrary, seems to be more concerned with the circumstances surrounding the actual foundation of the temple and with the description of its gradual development. It is evident that there were two distinct myths about the origin of the temple. The differences which we have briefly outlined seem to accord with the significance of the titles of the myths to which we have referred in the introduction. It will be noticed that the name of Horus or the falcon does not occur in the title of the myth about the origin of the Temple of the Falcon. And yet, the origin and the development of the earliest domain of the falcon is obviously linked with a time period of the mythical age described in our document as the time of the early primeval ones, and is brought into a close connection with the domain of the creator of the earth. Every time I read the word connection in here, it's spelled with an X. Connexion. The first Edfu myth would seem, therefore, to preserve, on the one hand, a picture of the homeland of the early primeval ones, which, in its essential nature, was the place of creation. On the other hand, it describes the origin of the cult of the falcon and the places with their mansions in which the falcon was worshipped first. The myth is a valuable document which has every appearance of being a history of an Egyptian cult and temple. There is every reason for assuming that this narrative reflects a genuine tradition of a remote date. This circumstance seems to indicate that, according to the theory implicit in our records, the primeval domains of the falcon and his temple were regarded as being the original sacred place of Egypt, or the original sacred places of Egypt. It has been seen on several occasions in the study of the Edfu texts how closely the creation, particularly the creation of the earth, is associated with the interpretation of the origin of the sacred domain of the falcon. This fact would seem to hint at the existence of an aetiological myth, Aetiological. Well, wait, let's look at aetiological, maybe. Let's look it up. Concerning a myth concerning the origin of the earth. Myth concerning the origin. Okay. What a cool, weird, big word. Ambulatory can go. Shoot, where are you at? Am I done? Balls, dude. Oh, there it is. It's got to be right. Wait, of the Earth. No, wait. Mother of pearls. Aetio. Wait, I can't even remember what it is. E. Reappearance. Primeval ones. Dude, it's on this page. Where am I? There it is. Aetiological. Aetio. Okay, I see where I am. Aetio. Okay, aetiological. The cause, set of causes, or manner of causation of a disease or condition. Wow, okay, so wait. The cause of. How you say that? Aetiological. A. Etiological pronunciation. Etiological. Etiological. Okay. E-E-T. Etiological. Etiological. E-E-T-E-E. Etiological. No, I don't want to practice with you. Okay, let's do it. Etiological. So the cause. This fact would seem to hint at the existence of an etiological myth concerning the origin of the earth as a prerequisite for the foundation of the sacred domains and their temples. This myth would, accordingly, have been modified and adapted to suit the local traditions. Therefore, it is suggested that the history of the origin of the primeval domains of the Falcon discloses, in part at least, what was once the contents of the sacred book of the early primeval age of gods. Ooh, I wonder if that book exists anywhere. Well, I guess every time's concurrent, so right. The second Edfu myth bears the title The Coming of Re to His Mansion of Misnet. The idea of the coming of the god to his house is stressed and is one of the characteristics of this myth. It describes, in all probability, a later stage in the development of the temple. It has been noticed that the description of the early part of the history of the solar domains does not occur in the narrative at all. There is no allusion and no claim to explain how the primeval domain of the sun god was created, nor do we find in the main sources any reference to the primeval pool of the sun god from which he and his domain would emerge. This myth would seem, therefore, to record the third period in the history of the mythical temples in general, when other gods began to appear in the lands of the sacred domains originally occupied by the falcon and his companions, and temples were founded for them. There appears to be a clear distinction between the interpretation of the origin of the sacred domains and that of the temples. There seem to have been two theories of the origin of sacred domains, and consequently two theories of the origin of the temples that were later erected on them. The mythical temples seem to have been conceived as a later creation, and sometimes at least as having been created on lands originally associated with different gods. From all the evidence available, one important fact seems to emerge. The origin of the sacred domain was conceived as a definite act of creation of the earth, which resulted in the origin of the temple. There are good reasons, therefore, for assuming that the sacred book of the early primeval age of the gods was the original writing concerned with the interpretation of the creation of sacred places. We imagine that this book enshrined the genuine expression of Egyptian knowledge on the origin of sacred places in general, a theory which included the explanation of how the first temple came into being. The trends of thought and traditions included in this book might have been the sharing point in writing much expanded books about the origin of sacred domains at a somewhat later date. Each new myth, which was added, brought to it new traditions and pictures of a somewhat later and more advanced stage in the development of these sacred places and their temples. We can refer here to another sacred book concerned with the history of the Egyptian temples, the existence of which is also revealed by the Edfu inscriptions, the Sacred Book of the Temples. This brief survey of ideas enshrined in the main documents of our study shows that in Egypt, the explanation of the origin of the sacred places in which the gods were first worshipped, as well as the subsequent development of such places, was a subject not only of vivid interest, but also of deep speculation. There is certainly, in the Edfu texts, much more than mere myth. Considering the manner in which the two Edfu myths were recorded, we incline to the opinion that these records embody a history of sacred places and temples that shows a conceptual and philosophical aspect. This brings to mind the belief in the words of the sages. This belief is new and valuable, but unknown to the major part of Egyptian cosmogony. For from the Edfu sources only can we learn that that the sages of the mythical age were believed to be the only divine beings who knew how the temples and sacred places were created. In addition to the cosmogonical records of the temple at Edfu, there are a number of other mythological texts which are concerned with the origin of the sacred places and temples. They are written in a very concise form, being sometimes reduced to mere epithets. Epithets? Is that how you say that? And in all probability are derived from records of much earlier date. This would confirm our hypothesis that the manner of writing the mythological history of the temple was not limited to the temple of Edfu, but was rather a general one. Doubtless, the Edfu temple presents us with the most extensive documents of this kind. The earliest evidence known of such a record is to be found in the text of a stela discovered at Hermopolis, 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 dating from the reign of Nectanebo II, Nectanebo. The Hermopolitan temple is there equated with the primeval dwelling place of the Ogdoad, and the actual temple is interpreted as its renewal. Several allusions to the original site of a temple occur in the inscriptions of the tomb of Petosiris, the tomb of Petosiris, Petosiris, Petosiris. The temple of Re was believed to have been founded in a pool in which Re was born, and which was the place of creation in general. Wow. A place where creation is. Other references to the creation of sacred domains are to be found in the inscriptions of the temple at Khonsu and Karnak. These inscriptions are not continuous narratives like the Edfu texts. They seem to be only extracts from cosmogonical records kept in that temple. These extracts, however, make it possible to adumbrate the Karnak theory on the origin of the temple. Adumbrate, Adumbrate. I see where I am. Okay. Adumbrate. Cool, we're learning so many new words. Adumbrate. Definition, pronunciation. Adumbrate. To foreshadow vaguely, intimate. To suggest, disclose, or outline partially. Overshadow, obscure. Adumbrate. Cool. I love that. Okay. Yum. Anne, yay! Welcome, dude. This is juicy. We're learning so many new words. So, adumbrate. Like foreshadowing, but like intimately. I had my finger on the place, and now where is it? Records, temple, mother of pearls. Karnak on the original. Okay, it's on 2 lines. There it is. These extracts, however, make it possible to adumbrate the Karnak theory on the origin of the temple. Mention is made of a land which emerged from Nun, N-U-N, before the high hill, and which was the birthplace of the Earthmaker. The high hill was created before the Payland emerged, and before sky, earth, and underworld had come into existence. Another passage refers to the creation of the high mound, which is that H weird backwards apostrophe Y dash mound, which existed earlier than the ground upon which the domains of the gods were founded. So that mound was first. A rather more continuous and connected narrative is to be found on the jamb of the main door in the second pylon at Karnak. Hey, I'm going to pull that Karnak picture back up again. Present. Share screen. Boom. Hypostyle. That's that word that we looked up. Hypostyle, which is this like columnar type of architecture. Karnak. The second pylon at Karnak. Okay, pylon at Karnak. It is obviously an abbreviated version of a myth of Thebes. Oh, wait, I skipped a line. It is obviously an abbreviated version of the myth of creation, interpreting the origin of Thebes. Thebes, isn't that Greece? The sacred land of Thebes is described as the god's primeval domain, which emerged from Nun, and on which further actions of creation took place. The high mound was created, then the ground, finally the god's domain. Wow, what a thought. Thebes. Where's Thebes? Thebes, it's Greece. Yeah. Okay. Bum, 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 bum. So, wow, that's wild. They're saying that the mound first, and then the ground was created, and then the domains of the gods were founded. A rather more continuous. Oh wait, did I already read that? A rather more continuous and connected narrative is to be found on the jamb of the main door in the second. Oh yeah, I read that whole thing. Okay. So the high mound was created, then the ground, and finally the god's domain. In the second part of this record, the primeval site of the Theban temple is described by a series of epithets. On the whole, they show ideas and hint at some mythological events similar to those contained in the Edfu cosmogonical records. Much shorter evidence of a myth of creation is to be found in the inscriptions of the Temple of Opet, O-P-E-T. The relationship of the temple with the primeval mythical time is expressed in a form of epithets, according to which the temple is the seat of the Earthmaker, the place from which the sky was uplifted, the place of the All-Creator, the sky of the soul, the underworld of the mummy, the place in which everything was created at the beginning, the place of the primeval ones, the homeland of the Ogdoad, the great primeval mound of the king of the gods who created that which exists. From this description of the nature of the temple, it is obvious that this series of epithets also must have been based on a prototype similar to the Edfu texts. The sources cited prove that there are solid grounds for considering that the Edfu records embody a theory on the origin of the temple, which was, in part at least, of general application. In the Temple of Dendera, I've heard people say it all kinds of ways, actually. On the contrary, okay, wait. In the Temple of Dendera, on the contrary, very few details about the mythical past of the temple can be gleaned. In one of the building texts, it is said that the site of the temple was the place in which the god issued from the lotus, that it is the province of him who created Re. The historical temple was believed to have been built on the foundation ground of the primeval age in which the god was born. In the main, however, we find repeatedly the common idea that the historical temple was the work of Ta, the builder gods, and was constructed according to the regulations given by Thoth. Reference should also be made to the creation myth preserved in the temple at Esna, and in that at El Hibeh, Hibeh. Both of them show a much modified conception of the drama of creation from which the temple resulted, and an order of ideas different from that of the Edfu cosmogonical records. The origin of the sacred places is not described in such detail as it is in our main Edfu sources. On the other hand, there can be quoted instances of a basically different history on the origin of the sacred places. There are a number of texts in which the idea of creation, which prevails in the Edfu records and in the text mentioned above, does not occur at all, but instead, the place on which the divine abode originated is said to have been a mound. This mound is described as the place in which the god found refuge during his fight against the enemies, and which later developed into a constructed place of worship. This view is predominant in the myth of Horus, and is also expressed in the legend about the fight of Horus against Seth. We find the same idea in the text dealing with the origin of the temple at Kom-Ombo. It is significant that in all these narratives, the chief deity is Re. We suspect that this theory on the origin of sacred places is closely connected with the solar cult, and therefore reflects Heliopolitan. Yeah, Heliopolis, which they found. It's so juicy. Hey, welcome in, Madushi Alwis. Welcome in, Osimo. Kom-Ombo, Heliopolis. Okay, so wait. We suspect that this theory on the origin of sacred places is closely connected with the solar cult, and therefore reflects Heliopolitan views on the origin of the sacred domains. It should also be pointed out that these narrations, or rather these narratives, do not describe all the places of the development as found in the Edfu cosmogonical records. There is no allusion to the way in which these mounds were fashioned. The myths start at the moment when the gods already lived within these mounds. These are not, then, original descriptions of the creation of the sacred places, but secondary interpretations. Except for the myth of Horus, which refers to the arrival of Re at Wetchesit Hor and to a battle with the enemies after which the Jeba was founded, there is no identity between the places which evolved within the mounds and the sacred places named in the Edfu cosmogonical records. We may add the evidence gathered in the transcriptions of the temple at Medamud, Medamud. This temple is said to be the mound, which is the place at which Re arrived. The explanation follows that Re came to that place while invoking the ancestors, and thus renewed the place in which they created him. There are obvious affinities between the texts at Karnak and in the tomb of Pedosiris and the Edfu records, all of which stress the connection with the creation. None of them, however, is a continuous narrative, nor do they present a complete myth concerning the origin of sacred places in the temples, in which divine beings acted as creators of this world, of the sacred places, and finally of the temple itself. Only at Edfu do we find a reasonably complete and logical account. It would not be unjustified, therefore, to claim that the fact attests the originality of the cosmogonical records of the temple at Edfu, and that it also confirms their general significance. Hence, the Edfu records can be confidently taken as the main source for an attempt to reconstruct the Egyptian theory of how a temple came to be. This attempt takes us back to the dawn of time when the world was still in darkness. Dude, juicy. Wow, 1 hour and 5 minutes. We did 2 chapters. I might call it here for the night. 1 hour. That's pretty good. And yeah, I have a really big, I'm going to call it right here after 1 hour. So yeah, my cousin, he nearly cut his thumb off. So I've been full-time back at the restaurant. So I haven't been as concentrated on the reading, but dang, it's so juicy. I have a big weekend ahead too. So I'll be working tomorrow and I have a show. So I won't be live tomorrow. I might go live once this weekend, but I'll be back though next week for sure. So dang. Hey, no caps. Good to see you, man. And welcome everybody that came and listened to that juicy info. Yeah, more to come in the future. So I wish you all wonderful, wonderful rest of your evenings. Wonderful Fridays coming into the weekend. Wonderful whenever you find this. Oh yeah, hey, let me stop screen. Boom. And yeah, I will see you next time. And until then, take care of yourselves. Thank you so much. Mwah. Thank you, everyone. YouTube, StreamYard, everyone here. I love yous. Thank you.